True or false? Sarah Palin said, "I can see I can see Georgia from my house."
So just to let you know, just as a
True or
small,
false?
just a
True or
small
false?
interruption.
True or false? Answer the question. True or false?
Okay, so you're not going to scream. I did not scream at you. You don't need to scream. It's okay. All right. And now, a live retelling of Cybersmith. I will be playing Uncle Father, and Du will be playing Cybersmith. Uncle Father. Me, wearing a dog collar and a leash, looking up at my man friend in his trench coat and fedora. Let's go out in public where you can walk me like I'm a dog in front of people who are visibly uncomfortable.
It's not a flipping fedora, it's a bowler hat!
Oh god, there's more. Key Goobin Goober, a fedora is a fedora is a fedora.
Anyway, with regards to the original post, what would actually be wrong with that? There's no mention of public nudity, nor of treating the human pet in any way that would be considered strange for a dog. Should people be obliged to modify their behavior so that the irrationally prejudicial do not experience discomfort?
Irrationally prejudicial? Motherfucker! Admit you have a pet play fetish. There's no shame on this website.
Okay, just please consider this following scenario. It's 5 to 10 years from now. You're sitting in a restaurant, enjoying a lovely meal, when I walk in, accompanied by my wife, my children, and my human pet, whose genitals are covered as it enters on all fours and is wearing underpants.
What does that mean? Hold up! No, Mercury, I saw it. We're gonna get there. I got you. What the fuck does that mean?
He says what he says.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
I mean, it seems pretty straightforward.
What is that?
I mean, yeah, what explanation do you need? What don't you understand?
What do you mean?
Just throwing it out there
human
casually.
on a leash.
What? Why?
Like it's a dog.
Well, but it's like he's not even doing it. He's not even doing it. Like, it's not even a fetish thing. He's like really just talking about the. Why is he semantics andying this?
Would you be happier if it was a fetish?
Kind of. I'm not gonna lie. I would kind of be happier if it was a fetish. This hurts me more that it's not one.
Shush.
I mean, it kind of. Well.
No. It hurts me more that it's not a fetish.
It's definitely a fetish. That's just a bit of normalizing it. Come on.
I don't like this. Okay, let's go on.
If my family and then I make an order of our own at the table next to you, in what way have we infringed upon your freedom? What rational basis do you have to demand that we leave our beloved pet at home? Fuck it all. Let's consider a more extreme scenario.
How can it be more extreme?
From now. Shut up, I'm reading. You're sitting in a restaurant, enjoying a lovely meal, when I walk in without my wife and children. For whatever reason, they haven't accompanied me. With my surgical modified human pet, wearing a collar, being led in by its leash.
Okay, two things.
What
I want to
the
know
fuck is happening?
I want to note that why would you slur out the word heck? But, you know, that's beside the point. And what do you mean by surgically modified? How are we surgically modifying here?
He goes a bit along under there, but it's pretty much, yeah, it goes on.
Oh, no!
Let's just say this man is one doctor title and one bad day away from being the doctor from Human Centipede.
I don't like this.
My pet has been spayed, neutered, though you can't tell because its genitals, along with its boobies, if it's a female, have been covered up. It has no vocal cords, and it walks on all fours, not by choice, but because its toes have been removed.
Why are you so in depth?
Its ankles being severed, it may also have had its thumbs and the last 2 segments of each finger amputated, making it easier to care for, no fingernails to trim. Perhaps I even, humanly, removed its eyes, making it less independent.
Oh, so
Why?
that's the surgical alteration. Okay.
Why? Why would it do that? Why would you do that? You don't do that to a regular dog. Why would you do that to a human? What the fuck? Why would you do this? There's no reason to do this. Why? What is
But at
happening?
least the eyes have been humanly removed.
Yeah, Starshine, I definitely like Tusk.
They're humanely removed, yes.
Yeah, the movie Tusk
all
kind
made
of reminds me of
humanly.
this. Yeah.
It's all done
And human
kindly.
centipede.
It's all done with kindness.
Yeah, Mercury, I know. What the actual fuck? I
It's
don't...
done with love.
Somehow, it gets worse from here. Somehow, it gets worse from here, I've been told. How?
What do you mean?
Oh, God!
Those are the thinkings of a normal man.
Okay, here we go. Here's more.
Even in this scenario, I haven't infringed upon your liberties. Irrational prejudices is precisely what you are. Prejudice.
I feel infringed on having read this. Certified iconic post. Hashtag submission. Hashtag fuck.
I mean, that's
That's
actually that's the true part.
That's fucking insane. Holy, how the fuck? Why? Well, yeah, flashbang to my eyes. I'm not enjoying this, Starshine. I'm not enjoying this. This is hurting me.
You're enjoying it.
I am not enjoying this. Why? Why did this man say these things?
I'm enjoying it.
He is big brain. That's why.
I don't like that he's
smooth
big brained. Yeah, smooth. I feel fucking smooth brain. So he comes on to the internet, and he's like, you know what? Today's the day I decide to write on a post about owning a human pet, right? And
Have you never done this?
Let's say, is it him saying he actually owns it, or is it expressing a fantasy to own it?
He says if he owns one
Right, if he
human
owns
pet
it.
and will take
So-
it out,
Right.
The desire is there.
You shouldn't judge him.
Right, I very much get the sentiment that he's very much a semantics Andy kind of person.
Yes,
that
definitely.
he wants to look at everything. Yeah, free. You don't like free speech. We live in a society. Fuck off.
We can't have a human pet. We live in a society.
I don't like
right?
the idea of human
So
pets.
true.
You know what's funny? I don't
Back in
understand.
his days,
What days? What fucking days? He's from the fucking UK. He's just here. He's in our days.
but he loves the old monarchy where people were allowed to own people.
Right. Cybersmith. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. I'm going to. I know that you said that you wanted to show live. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stream the call. Just give me 1 second. First and foremost, I would be remiss in not saying thank you for joining us. You first and foremost did not have to. That is very kind of you. Second off, welcome.
I'm hearing
to the
an
show.
echo.
Oh, are
Is
you
that
hearing an echo?
Oh,
Do-
wait, no. Pausing the call was the call was also open.
Yep.
Oops.
Well,
Yes. Hello. So you first, I guess. Everything good?
yes. Okay.
Oh.
All is well. Call is playing. Call is muted. Well, the video is muted. So, firstly, sorry, I'm not very well groomed. I was not long back from the gym. I was going to get a bit of hoovering done.
Oh,
Sorry, the place is a little bit of a mess. But no, I have made my name a word of power, and I get the sensation when people speak it.
Oh,
So,
okay.
is the lighting okay? I know there's a lot of backlighting here. As I said, I wasn't at all set up for expecting a stream. So
Oh no, so the lighting is perfect. I guess my first question to you is how would you have found the stream? Now you did say that you put your name to power. So my question to you is how would you have found us?
as I said, I have made my name a word of power.
Mm.
When it's spoken, I get the sensation, and when a lot of people are speaking it in quick succession, it's fairly easy to tell. Tracking you down wasn't especially easy, but I found you. So yes, as to what you were saying about display pineapples, this is the fundamental thing that leftoids and Marxists don't understand. supply is not an intrinsic quality of a commodity. Supply, or rather value, is not an intrinsic quality
One
of a
moment,
commodity.
please.
It varies
One
in
moment,
accordance
please.
with supply and demand.
Okay.
Falgi, they can't see him.
I put it in there. I fixed the transition.
There it
I
is.
do
There it
apologize.
is.
Yep, I
I'm
do
sorry
apologize
for
about that.
interrupting.
Yes, you can continue with your comments. I do apologize.
So, because value is not intrinsic to commodities, but rather varies depending on supply and demand, the value of a commodity may seem strange to you in one context, but in another context it makes perfect sense. To you, the idea of displaying a pineapple seems ridiculous. A pineapple is a common everyday item. But I believe that tradition arose after the end of rationing, after the world wars. So you have to understand, people who'd just gone through a blockade, who had just gone through rationing, a pineapple was actually quite an exotic thing, quite a difficult to acquire thing. It was a marker of wealth. And like anything that's a mark of wealth, people will tend to ostentatiously display it. For example, in Roman times, and to some extent in medieval times, the colour black was not associated with mourning. That came later. That came in the Victorian period. In medieval and Roman times, it was associated with ostentatious wealth. Why? Because it was extremely expensive to make black materials. You needed either several rounds of dyeing with a very deep ink, usually extracted from squids or the like, or for black leather, you'd either need to dye that or you would need to kill a polar bear, which is one of the only creatures with naturally black skin. So you have to imagine this was a tremendously expensive material. So to wear black wasn't to mark yourself as a morose individual or one undergoing mourning. It was to mark yourself as an individual of conspicuous wealth. I think, as I said, sorry, prepared in a bit of a hurry.
No, you're okay.
No worries.
One of the things I would like to ask you, and I am first and foremost, I want to thank you for that information. It is something that is quite interesting. But I did kind of want to just ask you just a simple question. How did you find yourself on the internet? Obviously, the reason why we were reviewing you, for instance, is that you are famous for a particular Tumblr post. But I'm curious for you, and for no judgment at all, because, hey, there should never be any judgment. You're here. You've come graciously onto our show, and I want to treat you with respect. How did you find yourself on the internet, or specifically in Tumblr? Like, what is your history?
Well, I originally came across Tumblr many, many years ago. I think it was 8 or 9 years ago, debating one particular vegan blog, but that was through anonymous asks, which were a feature of Tumblr at the time. And eventually I just decided, no, to be fair, I'm also going to create an account. That way this person can see my full opinion and reply to them. That person was called Vegan Wastoid, and she's long since deleted because her other blog, Municipal Wastoid, was attacked by a group of other leftists when she styled her hair into dreadlocks. And this is the common trend you'll see. The left always consumes itself. Soviet Russia collapsed. The French Revolution in France eventually ate its own. This is always the trend with leftoids. Recently, I debated a leftoid, Wack Nicholson. He's been cancelled too.
You also debated Catholics, right?
Who has also been cancelled, yes. Leftoids always consume their own. It is the perennial habit of the Marxist.
So I guess an interesting thing I would say is that, do you believe, you talked about leftoids a lot, and you do talk about leftism and things like that. How would you identify your political leanings, and how would you describe that?
I've fairly consistently described my political beliefs. I am a reactionary libertarian monarchist. Okay.
Yes. It's just for our audience who may not know you. I don't particularly know you. This is my first interaction with some of the statements that you've made online. And so, you have, as one of my co-hosts has told me, you have interviewed, or you've debated, individuals like Keffels and other individuals. What do you think about your, let's say, infamy on the internet, specifically for some of your more controversial beliefs, one would say?
Well, I wouldn't say my beliefs are actually that controversial in a historical context, in the broader historical context, but a lot of the controversy comes from people taking them out of context.
Mhm.
I wouldn't say any of my views are actually, on the whole, all that controversial. For example, people have discussed the human pet post, but very few people remember that in its original context, this was a post discussing a fairly narrowly defined concept, which is you will never really be satisfied with public decency laws because, really, when we look at it, that's an application of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Any set of rules that describes anything complex enough to be useful is going to be either incomplete or inconsistent. You can't have a set of rules to regulate what's acceptable public conduct that will not either allow something you don't want to allow or contradict itself by banning something you want to permit.
Mm-hmm.
And
Like,
this was my example, and that was why my example was drawn up explicitly. You've got no direct showing of genitalia. The treatment of the pet is not something that is actually done, that is not done to normal pets. For example, declawing. Do you know when you declaw a cat, that is literally what you are doing?
Yes.
You are removing the bones in its fingers. So when you realize in its proper context, that debate is not really saying anything controversial at all. It was a response, however, to broader discussions on Tumblr happening at the time that have long since been forgotten and aren't included in the decontextualized screenshots.
And you do understand that declawing specific animals like cats, for instance, is considered in some spaces to be inhumane, correct?
True, but it's not considered a violation of public decency laws.
I see.
A person who declaws his cat is not considered to be violating public decency. And that was the specific context of the argument. It was rules about public decency. And my argument, as part of that broader trend of arguments, is that you can't have a set of laws that will regulate it. You do actually have to involve human judgment. You can't just say, make things illegal if I'm uncomfortable with them. That is never going to produce a coherent body of law.
I saw that one of the examples you named was also breastfeeding.
Again, discussed, but did I ever say it should be illegal? No.
No, you didn't. I'm just saying it was one of the examples you brought up.
Exactly. It was discussed in the context of this is something which could potentially make people uncomfortable or even traumatized, but you can't realistically criminalize it. You do have to defer at some point to human judgment. And this is just the sociological implication of Gödel's. I need to give my hair a trim. It's been a while since I've done that. This is just really the sociological implication of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. You cannot have a set of axioms that produces a worldview which is both consistent and comprehensive. There will either be things that are true but not provable, or there will be contradictions, or in many useful examples, there will be both. This is unfortunately getting into what the limits of the law are. You cannot make a law that effectively legislates your entire moral worldview into effect.
I see.
And that was a discussion I was having with, surprisingly, people on the left on Tumblr.
And if I can ask one more question about the human pet thing, because it was obvious that you put quite some thought into it with the whole thing.
I wouldn't say I put a great deal of thought into it. I'm surprisingly good at improvisational thinking. That entire thing was off the cuff.
Right,
That's really surprising because with cutting the what's the name for it? The ankle thingies.
The Achilles tendon? Yes, that was something I'd been familiar with as an injury that people could sustain in medieval warfare.
Well, that's what I was about to say. I think too, as someone who's worked in improvisational acting and other things like that in the past, it does come from a basis of knowledge. It comes from a basis of understanding and a basis of being able to pull and collate like-minded, not necessarily like-minded ideas, but similar ideas that create a body of work. So in that instance, let's say if you can transport yourself back to when you were creating that response, in what fashion did you, if you can identify what specific I would say reference points helped you create such a strong improvisational response?
I can't recall exactly. You have to remember this was more than 7 years ago now.
Yes, it was.
So I can't possibly remember what exact reference pools I was thinking of at the time for something that happened 7 years ago.
Mm. And then I know that over the years, people have identified you, as you said, your name has been spoken to power. What do you think about the way the broader internet identifies you or views you, for instance?
Well, again, it is largely due to events having been taken out of their context, and this is a problem I see with a lot of shallow thinking. And it's the same issue you made with the idea of display pineapples. You're viewing display pineapples from a modern context in which pineapples are not an especially exotic or valuable commodity. The problem is you are failing to take into account the context in which they were viewed as that.
Right, but we are just making fun of an historical context. We can laugh at previous historical context. I wasn't saying that it was a generalization on, let's say, the British people, for instance, because then that would continue to look at the atrocities that individuals have committed long throughout history based on human beings and based on what their forefathers or what their ancestors have done. We can look at things in a satirical manner. I'm sure you yourself have looked at things. I did see
the problem is that the left has essentially erased the notion of satire as a distinct form of media. You now treat satire largely as news. For example, true or false, Sarah Palin said, I can see Georgia from my house.
So just to let you know, just as a small interruption.
Answer the question. True or false?
Okay. So you're not going to scream. I did not scream at you. You don't need to scream. It's okay. Just to let you know, this is not a leftist channel per se. Maybe some of us are progressive, for instance.
Has that given you enough time to Google the answer?
No, it doesn't have to give me time to Google the answer. I can see that you're a little upset.
Can you answer the question, please?
No.
Can you answer the question, true or false?
I'm not going to answer the question because I wanted to give
and here
context.
No. Because this is the problem.
So you asked to come onto the show. And I have been very kind about it, but what I just want to say is just to give you some clarification, because I understand maybe some of our videos maybe have given you a difference of opinion. Yes, some of us may have progressive views, for instance, and it is okay. It's okay to think that. I'm not
talking about specifically progressive views.
Okay, but you continue to say leftoids, and I would just like to clarify.
Yes, I am including you within that.
That is perfectly fine, but that is not what's happening here. Because I'm trying to explain it to you and you screamed. There was no reason to scream. I am listening to everything that you're saying, and like I said, right?
Answer the question then.
Like I said before, well, I would like to clarify something because you screamed, and that's inappropriate. I've never screamed at you and won't scream at you. Okay? This is not a leftist channel. We are asking you questions more around just how the internet views you. So this is not what this channel is about, and that's not what this interview is about. And I do apologize if you think that you have...
Failing to declare your political views doesn't mean you don't have them, and I do challenge you on that point. You've said this is not a left-wing channel.
No, it's not.
I think I could argue, oh right, so how do you avoid your own views biasing it? Because I think it's fair to say all of you are on board.
I'm here for the first time. I'm no centrist.
It's very, very simple to say that, yes, we all look at things from a political standpoint, but if you would like to have a political argument, we are not the channel for that. I can direct you to a channel, channels like Westside Tyler or other instances. Those are political channels. What we are here is, this is for the purposes of satire. This is just the purposes of understanding internet history and maybe even... Quote unquote, people like to say drama. I don't like to use that term.
Here is my objection.
Okay.
You have used this term satire as though it's some inherently apolitical concept. But my argument is that because the modern woke cultural Marxist fake news left uses satire to launder its views, so to speak, even in ways that are considered apolitical, that makes the concept of satire as something that is inherently non-political and at best outdated notion. And this has been true for decades now. And that is why I would like you to answer the question.
So you're using
true or false?
Okay.
Sarah Palin said she could see Georgia from her house.
So that wasn't... She did not say Georgia specifically, but we're not going to go there, right?
No, she didn't say any of that specifically.
So
Tina
again,
Fey said it when pretending to be her on Saturday Night Live.
Again.
That was satire, and yet it influenced how people thought about Sarah Palin, which influenced, I believe, to some extent, the 2008 presidential election in the Land of the Eagle. So no, I do not believe you get to rope off satire and say, well, this isn't political because it's satire.
So
a large number of people of this generation get their news from people like John Oliver, or Spitting Image, or Jon Stewart,
or Ben Shapiro,
or
Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk
does not claim, and Charlie Kirk does not claim to be engaging in satire. Jon Stewart,
right, but they are satirical in the nature of their lies, though.
No, they aren't.
If we're going to say that, right?
They aren't engaging in satire. They're very
not journalists either.
They call themselves journalists. The problem is that Jon Stewart, John Oliver, Spitting Image, all these fake news, Illuminati, cultural Marxist lying bastards, they call themselves satirists. They call themselves comedians. Stephen Colbert called himself a comedian, but his actions are influencing political perceptions. So someone like Ben Shapiro or Charlie Kirk is perfectly straightforward. He'll say to you very honestly, I am a political actor. I am engaging in political punditry. My actions have a definite political bias. And I am quite happy to call myself a conservative or a right-winger or a reactionary. There's no dishonesty there. They are quite openly calling themselves political, and they are quite clearly coming from a right-wing perspective. My argument is that the left continuously uses the shroud of satire, the mask of satire, to conceal its nefarious agenda.
Well, would you not also say that someone like Steven Crowder, for instance, uses a lot of satirical nature in their media consumption, and as well as their media portrayal? That's something that was always been a part. He has always claimed to be a comedian of some kind. That's always been a part of his portrayal of the news, that he sees it. And I don't think, personally speaking,
he has never used being a comedian as a defense. If we consider, for example,
that's very incorrect. That is okay. So I'm going to call that's not correct. Okay, so he's used that. He has used that multiple times when he makes racist caricatures of people, but not going too far into politics. Because again, this is not a political sphere. Again, I can recommend you.
This is my problem. You say you're not getting into. You say you're not being political, but that's the same thing Jon Stewart said in his infamous interview with Tucker Carlson.
Okay, so
that was the same argument. I'm not being political. I'm just being funny. Well, you are to some extent being political, and you're using comedy as the mask from which you project these political attempts to undermine Western civilization.
So Cybersmith, I want to ask you a question, because you had a very stark reaction when I was trying to explain the nature of our channel, as well as you've been having a very stark reaction now. And this is coming from a place of a genuine honesty. I kind of get the sense that you feel like you've been dealt a bad hand by the internet in some way, shape, and form, because I feel
like humanity has been dealt a bad hand by the internet. Yes, the internet, through decontextualization, has, although it is in some respects a fantastic tool for people to inform themselves with, has in many ways become a biased instrument with which to mislead people. For example, consider the effects of the Google search engine algorithm and how much that has affected what news sources people see and how it affects people's common perceptions. Google will promote certain sources, which are often the only sources people look at, that promotes a certain view of the world, a certain view of individual figures, and a certain way of considering reality that has, in many cases, damaged, I believe, people's understanding of the world. The modern generation, the Gen Z, as they're called, or even Gen Alpha, they are less technically literate than even younger millennials like myself. I'm actually, well, I'm either a very young millennial or I'm very old Gen Z. I'm either the oldest Zoomer or the youngest millennial.
How old are you?
Born in 2005. That's common knowledge. I was born in 1995. So some people say that that's the cutoff point.
You're younger than me.
Yeah, some people would say that's the cutoff point for being a millennial. Some would say, well, you're a Generation Z if you were between 1995 and 2005. So that's that's kind of the issue that you're running into. But my generation, my year, that was essentially the last year in which there are going to be computer literate people. Modern people, they use technology, but they don't understand it. If you look at a child trying to use a file system now, they don't really understand how, because they've never had to interact with one. They've used apps that interact directly with it. They've used programs that have their own file types and their own direct way of interacting with those file types. A lot of people can't, let alone can't use a simple WIMP interface, so Windows icons, mouse and pointer, much less anything like a command line interface. So I think in many respects, the way the internet has been used by these manipulative organizations that work for the Illuminati and that serve the global left has been a tremendous detriment to human flourishing. And I think many people have been dealt a bad hand. The human race has been dealt a bad hand by the internet.
So, but again,
I always say the new generation got soft because they don't get read horrifying fairy tales. We just had this discussion earlier, because they don't get read horrifying German fairy tales.
Yes, the horrifying German fairy tales would fix the youth of today. That is correct. But one thing, and this is, again, and you explained yourself very well, do you yourself feel like you've been dealt a bad hand by the internet, the way the internet perceives you at large?
To some extent, yes, but I recognize that as being part of a broader trend.
And in I guess this is my question
in
to you.
In the same way, I recognize your claim to be satire as part of a broader trend.
Okay. So again, just asking you, have you yourself, how have you dealt with something like this? Honestly speaking, how have you dealt with some of the
dealing
notoriety?
With it right now.
Okay. I mean, sure, you're coming on to us, and we do appreciate that. But again, my question to you is, how have you dealt with it in your everyday life? For instance, have people ever recognized you, or when you go on the internet? Because I do know, if memory serves me correctly, you had said that Cybersmith at one time was banned off specific platforms for some of his views or opinions. Is that correct, Tim?
You'll know that I've had multiple Tumblr accounts. You'll know that that Tumblr account is not the one I use now. I am now the Cybersmith. That was part of the lot of accounts that were deleted from Tumblr. And of course, I've gone through several, well, they were called Twitter accounts back then, now X accounts, but thankfully Elon's been a lot less censorious. So absolutely, there is a problem. I think another issue with the internet is you have to look at patterns of behavior, and this is something software developers have to consider. What is the path of least resistance on the internet? And I think part of the issue with how we communicate with each other online, it's not just that algorithms tend to filter us towards people who are like ourselves. It's far too easy to block people online. And this results in some sense, the modern generation being, although they have the greatest ability to communicate, in practice, they are the most ideologically sheltered group that there's ever been. Because consider, for example, some peasant farmer in the 1200s. Who would that person's social group be? Well, it would be the farmers next door. It would be the blacksmith in the local village. It would be the miller he sold his grain to. It would be the local lord. Now, if those people had political views that didn't align with his, or religious views that didn't align with his, or ideological views or philosophical views that didn't align with his, there's nothing really he could do about it. That was the only social circle he had. So your average 1200s peasant probably had more intellectual diversity in his social group than the modern internet person, who just blocks anyone with whom that person disagrees, and then is directed by an algorithm to other people who are in ideological lockstep.
So my
this
question,
is the problem.
So sorry to interrupt you.
We are not challenged intellectually because we, unless we actively do what I do, which is seek out people with opposing political views, we don't speak to people who don't agree with us.
Okay.
Because of the Illuminati.
Okay, that's
Illuminati.
Illuminati. So you are of the belief, and you don't have to wax poetic on this. It's just a yes or no. You're of the belief that there is a global elite of some kind that is separating
New
humanity.
World
Is
Order.
that New World Order? Correct.
I'd say belief, but you can literally go to their websites and the videos they make. The Davos group is not a secret conspiracy. They openly exist.
Yeah, well,
You've
I'm just
got
saying
the World
there are some
Economic
people that
Forum,
don't
you've got
believe
the
that.
Bilderberg Society. it is very well known that these people exist, and they will admit to their plans in the open. I don't think you can. So, is it a belief they exist? Well, yes, they definitely do.
So I guess, Cybersmith, if you don't mind me asking then, and it's a little bit of a divert, but I am genuinely curious, what are some of the things that you do in your own time for instance, either hobbies or things for yourself? Because I think if I can just expand a little bit on what you've been saying about people not understanding, people that don't agree with one another, things like that nature, I'm very curious how you, like, what do you do in your normal life? Because I think that the sentiment that I'm getting is that from you specifically, a lot of people have judged you on the internet per se for specific takes that you have. Now, I don't agree with them, and that's completely fine.
No,
I don't have to agree with them.
They aren't judging me on takes I have. They're judging me on decontextualized items. For example, you'd never seen my YouTube channel before I linked you this comment. You were going to make an entire video about me.
Well, I had seen the YouTube channel. It was in there. It was in there. We were just double checking that it was attached to your channel. I did see that you spoke about Atlantis, if I remember correctly.
Okay, so if you see my video, you'll know what some of my hobbies are.
Okay. Well, I'm asking.
Can you name some?
I'm asking.
You should know if you've seen my YouTube channel. You should know. For example, what baking is one. I've made multiple videos about my baking. I recently uploaded a video of some rolls that I made on my X account. But that's the thing. You don't actually look at my account. You don't look at the videos I post. You would know the answer to that question.
One of your hobbies.
Wait,
you also posted some of your cooking pictures on your.
Yes,
you did. So on your Twitter.
So you do actually know you do know quite a bit about my hobbies, or you would if you looked at the accounts. But you don't.
So
what you're
I am
mostly
asking
looking at is screenshots other people have taken.
I will be honest.
Decontextualized examples.
If you would listen for a moment, if I'm honest, I'm the one who actually followed you for quite some time, and so the others here don't know that much about you.
So we are being introduced. But honestly,
because this was the stream where I would introduce you to them, so I showed a few things to them, and we were going to go into depth about it. And so it's very nice that we have you here, so we can ask about the things we don't understand. Right. Because in writing, you don't often know what goes on in the person's head, and now we have the chance to ask you directly.
Right, and and I would like to say this. I understand that you are upset, and that's okay. And I do want to say this first and foremost. It's okay to be upset that you feel like that people don't understand you and things like that, right? But the reason that I am asking you those things is there are people that don't know that, and they know your face, for instance. And like I've said previously, if you watched part of the stream, first and foremost, I'm going to compliment you on your facial hair. I do want to kind of get that out of the way. I do think that is a labor of love. By the way, I
had to go and rapidly shave all the stubble off. So sorry that for the bit of a delay. I was
you're fine.
Not long back from the gym and started hoovering when I realized people were talking about me.
Right, and honestly speaking, that I can tell that's a labor of love of some kind. That is a fully involved experience, and I guess that's my question to you is that what do you want the internet to know about you as a person, and not just the screenshots of things. Again, some of the things that you may have said, I don't agree with, and that's okay. Or just the way that you presented the materials and information, totally fine. But I am genuinely curious, what are the things that you would want people to know about you as a person, not you as the idea?
You act as though those things are separate, but as I said, I've made my name a word of power. How does a man transcend himself if not by becoming an idea?
Okay. Again, but you also said in your own admission that the internet is controlled, right? That the way that people are perceived on the internet and almost segregated on the internet is influenced, correct?
But the way it uses that influence is by creating a path of least resistance and trusting that people will follow that path.
So again, my personal question to you is, what do you want people to know about you? Listen, again, we don't have to agree at the end of this conversation. That's not really the point of this. But I think something that one of the chatters did say that I think is interesting is that it is very interesting in a way that part of the way that your name did come to power in one sense was not of your own design. It was people finding certain things about you and proliferating that onto the internet. And commendable that you've taken that and made it your own thing. But again, what would you want people to know about you?
Well, one thing, I do engage in creative writing. I actually engage in poetry sometimes. For example, later tonight I've got a game going. It's if everyone shows up, it'll be a normal session of Pathfinder, and I tend to document those when I'm in a game. And for this group, I tend to write a poem for every session. But it looks like someone's going to be missing it, so we're going to try out the new Starfinder second edition rules.
Yeah,
So,
that's actually very interesting. I actually, as a game master myself, and I know one of our individuals here, Greg. He's currently away from his computer right now. I know that he also plays games, but Pathfinder, it's a very nice. It's a module that I've been trying to get into, but just haven't had the time to read through, as my history is more with Dungeons and Dragons and running games for those and people who are not too familiar with tabletop games. And that's
right,
it's really kind that you that you write poetry based on your game sessions. How did you get into that?
That's a real cool
Well,
extra.
a little bit, I suppose. Back in school, I used to I used to write poetry for because it was something I found quite frustrating at the time. But later on, I did a little bit as a hobbyist, but mostly prose,
Mhm.
mostly a prose. Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's very interesting. So, would you? I mean, if it's too personal, it is okay. But would you mind sharing us a piece of your poetry?
well, there's something you can again if you follow me on Tumblr. Let's see if I can pick up
Well, again,
one of
I
them.
admittedly I don't. I
I think
admittedly
I'm the
never use
only one
Tumblr.
that follows you.
Yeah, admittedly I don't use Tumblr at all.
Right. Poetry. So one of my more recent parts. This was actually inspired by. This didn't end up being in the session write up, but it was something I thought about from Pathfinder. So I'll send you that. I'll
Yeah,
send you
and I will
that one. Let's
pull it up
see.
on stream.
Here we go.
Yeah, have you shared it
Grab
here?
that link.
Okay. You put it in here? All right.
So that was inspired by thinking about what the world might look like to creatures with low light vision, which is slightly distinct from dark vision.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons I don't particularly care for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition is that it compressed low light vision and dark vision into the same thing, which, in my opinion, significantly degrades the quality of the game and how you think about light sources.
Very fascinating. Do you mind if I read this on stream to our listeners who are currently watching? Because some of them may
Feel
not be
free.
able to. Okay, I'm just going to read it. The poem is called Ode to the Brightness of Midnight. By the pale blue light of the moon, my love, by the pale blue light of the moon, I shall come to dance with you soon, my love, by the pale blue light of the moon. For the stars, they shine in the sky, my dear, and the sea water glistens below. So shed not one tear, and don't cry, my dear, as the mountaintops blaze white with snow. The lights of the night shine so brightly, my heart, in a way quite distinct from the day. By midnight, I see things quite rightly, my heart, as it chases the shadows away. I'll meet you in time, 'neath the moon, my sweet. Yes, we lovers shall reconcile then. I'll visit by starlight cover, my sweet, until dawn comes to part us again. Honestly, that is very nice. I will say this. I would be remiss in saying that your poetry is quite heartfelt. And I do think that is a nice thing to show. And I guess to expand upon that, when did you for yourself find that poetry was a creative outlet specifically for your Pathfinder games or any of the games that you ran?
Well, that was, I'd say, over the past few years. I first started, I think, playing Pathfinder in 2019. My first real exposure to TTRPGs back then. So I guess that would be when that started. But yeah, I've engaged in creative writing on and off for a long time.
Mm-hmm. And then how do your players react to this? I'm very curious, is this a group of friends that you've been with for many years? Do you play games for newcomers? I'm curious how you find your players.
Almost entirely online. There are various ways. A lot of places have sources for people looking
Right.
for groups.
Right.
But sometimes you find it through word of mouth. Sometimes from
Mm-hmm.
it's someone from an older game you were with recommends you to a newer game.
Mm-hmm.
So all sorts of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Discord is pretty useful for that.
Yeah, Discord is very useful for that. And it'd be remiss for me to ask you this. But for you specifically, it seems like creative writing, for instance, and being creative on the internet is something that you honestly take pride in. If you're showing that and you display that onto the internet, is that something that you do in your normal everyday life as a part of your job? Obviously, you don't have to reveal what you do for work if you don't wish to, but I'm curious if that's a part of your everyday life.
No, people tend to be surprised if they've encountered my creative writing first. But I worked as a tutor for computing science, and I've worked as a software developer. I don't engage in that much, nor in my daily life.
Mm-hmm.
I've also been told I have quite an interest and a knowledge of history. I really don't. I'm a dilettante in that respect, but that's still more than a lot of other people, sadly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think people get that impression a lot because you talk a lot about monarchy and ancient Rome, for example. I think that's how many people get that impression.
Well, yes, but that's having a basic awareness of the past,
Mm-hmm.
which is something that I think most people have, and certainly most people who were expected to have any impact on public policy were expected to know,
Mm-hmm.
even if we go back just 80 years. Now, I think the only major example of a person who, by the standards of even up to 80 years ago, today would be considered an educated politician would be someone like Boris Johnson. That was not considered an extraordinary amount of knowledge to have about history. That was considered a reasonable baseline, and most people today, including myself, fall far short of that. We are perhaps the most historically ignorant generation ever. Certainly, if you look amongst those of us who we consider to be educated and whom we empower to make decisions about public policy, we are by far and away the most historically ignorant generation that there's ever been, I think.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you mentioned Boris Johnson, and it's a very interesting time in politics. And there's not a political channel, but I do know that his departure from his seat of power was met with.
This is not an explicitly political channel,
Yeah.
though. As I've mentioned, I believe you are probably more political than you care to think.
Oh, I can say that I'm probably more political than I care to think, but I would say that such as questions of asking you about your Pathfinder experience.
Archaeology wasn't a thing until the past 100 years, dudes. It absolutely was.
Mm. Okay.
Napoleon's expedition had archaeologists in the late 1700s.
Mm-hmm.
Napoleon's expedition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, what I would say is that, like you mentioned before, yes, I can admit that I have my own political leanings, but the reason I honestly wanted to bring you on and have some of these questions, and I do understand what Moy's saying, not necessarily by the modern.
What do you mean, not to modern standards?
Okay. Well,
that's not saying that they didn't engage in archaeology. That's saying they didn't engage in modern woke leftist historical revisionism.
Okay.
Modern stuff.
Cybersmith, you can argue with my chat when we are done speaking. I would just like to know more about you. I completely understand that you that you have, opinions on many political things. But I wanted to say again, the reason that I wanted to bring you on was not to necessarily judge you by either your political leanings or some of the statements you said. It's just all honestly to get a deeper understanding about knowing who you are as a person. I do think that's, listen, again, we don't have to agree on everything. There's certainly things I don't agree on with you, but from what I can kind of gather from the cursory information that I know about you, I don't think people necessarily readily know about your poetry. I know that you post it, but that's more for the people who follow you for different reasons, whether it be positive or otherwise. I think that there is a lot of what's going on. Moist, you're fine. You're fine, dear. Don't worry about it.
I also have one question that's kind of random, but are you familiar with Tipster?
Familiar, yes. I believe we've spoken a few times. He was on Keffel's Discord a number of times, so I'm familiar with him. We've spoken in passing.
Do you have any opinion about him?
Not much. I can't say I've ever really looked at his content. I understand he's a woke leftist Marxist, like most of you.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a bit of I like
He's
to call him a
cringe.
skinwalker.
Yeah.
He's cringe,
he is
exactly.
He
He's a
is
bit of a
very cringe,
skinwalker.
Yeah.
Fuck that dude.
But I
And
guess
again, the left eats its own. Same thing happened to Robespierre.
I'm not a leftist, so I
Yeah.
can say it.
Again, you can everybody eats their own, but that's not the point of this conversation, right? But I did have something very curious to ask you, right? So you found yourself on a stream like Keffel's, for instance. How did you find yourself on that? Explain to our audience how you found yourself on a platform like that.
Oh, I believe she was going to interview Bird Respector, but he was having technical issues, and he asked if I could do it instead, so I did it instead.
Mm-hmm. And how did you feel about that overall experience? Again, this kind of ties into a little bit of the curiosity that I have about you, right? Because, and take this by no disrespect, in the grander internet circles, right? If we're looking at internet speak for say, some would consider you a lolcow in some regards. But again, I'm just more curious as to how you would find yourself on that platform, and how do you feel about said notoriety, irregardless of how you've transitioned to it.
Regardless or irrespective. Irregardless is not a word.
I know I say the word incorrectly. I do apologize, but regardless of that, thank you very much. So when you found
archaeology is more high tech nowadays, Sanderson Shaw.
Okay.
Well, by that standards, Indiana Jones wasn't an archaeologist, and if Indiana Jones wasn't an archaeologist, then no one is an archaeologist.
So Cybersmith, can we just answer the question real quick? I would just appreciate if we can ignore the chat for a little bit if you want to rejoin the chat. So my question was, it very simply, people would consider you, and by no disrespect, I said this again, a lolcow by internet standards. And you found yourself on a stream of Keffel's, and while I don't agree with a lot of her takes and whatever that may be, I'm very curious how you found yourself there. You did express that before, and how you felt about that experience overall, and the grander experience of how the people view you on the internet.
Well, I think how people view me on the internet, and something that showed me, was a lot of people who consider themselves quite educated about politics, and who speak on it, are profoundly ignorant about a great number of things, and perhaps worryingly don't realize how ignorant they are. And there's that old there's the old graph of as your knowledge about something goes up, your awareness of how much you don't know about that increases. So there's a sort of there's an unfortunate stable point where you have very little knowledge and a great deal of self-confidence. And I think I've fallen victim to that, but so have a lot of other important topics.
And how would you identify that you've fallen victim to that same fact?
Well, interesting example would be a lot of people have called me a fascist, or argue that I'm in favor of government restrictions, because they don't understand very much about the history of monarchism. Take Keffels, for example, who assumed that monarchies were inherently authoritarian. But throughout most of history, when monarchies have given way to republicanism, the result has been far more authoritarian. For example, did you know there were fewer than 1,000 total Okhrana agents in all of Soviet Russia when the Tsar was in charge, in all of Tsarist Russia, rather, before the Soviet Union was established? And they were almost all focused in Moscow, and the people they were looking at would be the people the Soviets would consider bourgeoisie intellectuals. They weren't spying on individual peasants and trying to control what individual Russian peasants did. Your political freedom in Russia was way higher as a peasant under the Tsar than it would have been as a proletariat under the Soviet Union.
So I have a question for you. Are there any things on the internet, and if you can't express on it, are there any things that you would take back that you have said? And this is not, let's say, in regards to, I don't agree with this take. You could say that you don't agree with that statement now. That's perfectly fine. But do you think that there are parts of how you have showed yourself on the internet that you wish you could take back? And if there are, what are those things?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember them exactly. There have probably been times that I've been rude to people or thoughtless to people that I would generally try to take back. I've probably had bad days where I've been irritable and I've said something unpleasant to someone, and I would take that back. I do try to be a cordial person towards people who whenever possible.
Yeah, and I think that that was evident. I understand that you were a little bit heated before, but you've been cordial with me this entire time, and I do want to again express that appreciation. The reason I ask is that there are some times where infamy, let's use it as the term that it is, can be it can be daunting. I guess that leads into another question. When did you first find out that you were somewhat infamous on the internet specifically? I'm curious.
Well, you have to remember I was on Tumblr was when the human pet post initially spread, but I was pretty well known even before that for other comments that I'd made and other disagreements I had. I'd been on Tumblr for, I think, about a year maybe before that post happened, and I was fairly well known there for other things I'd said. So that things people had taken out of context as well there. So that wasn't a huge surprise to me.
But as we are talking a bit today, how did you feel about it as it was happening in the process of this? As you said, the Tumblr post, the human pet post specifically, is about 7 or 8 years ago, if I remember correctly. And I'm curious, in that 7 to 8 year time span, how have you viewed the way that your notoriety increased on the internet? Was there some trepidation? Was there joy? Were there drawbacks to it? I'm very curious how your experience was.
As I said, because I was mostly engaging via Tumblr, I wouldn't say it was too bad. It's been annoying sometimes. There are cases where people have seen out of context things I've said, and they've concluded, "Oh, you must be a terrible person," and I've been kicked out of groups or banned from places without a chance to explain any of that. But I think that's largely due to those people being censorious woke Marxists who work for Red China. So that's probably in that case inevitable. Those are just people who refuse to hear any other worldview or any other perspective. There are probably some people who would have been willing to approach me and have interesting conversations if it weren't for the notoriety. But I think on the whole, I've probably had more interesting conversations because of notoriety than I've missed interesting conversations, all things considered.
And I'm curious, you said that there was a moment where you were barred or taken out of groups, for instance. Can you recall a specific time that happened and how that made you feel?
Well, one example would be the Pathfinder 2 subreddit on Reddit. I made a number of posts there that were actually quite popular and well received, but I was kicked out of that group for no explanation. Well, actually, the explanation was you haven't broken any of our rules, but things you've posted elsewhere make us dislike you, so we're done. So that's largely just due to Reddit mods being tyrannical. So that was them acknowledging you haven't broken any of our rules, all of your posts here have been perfectly valid, there's nothing on Reddit you've done, but we don't like things we've seen that have been taken out of context elsewhere. But that is, that's the woke mind virus. That is the same ideology that led the Jacobins to kill the king in France. It's the same ideology that led to the overthrow of the Tsar in Russia. It's the same ideology that got all of those people killed by the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. It's a disaster every time.
I see. And what would you... I guess this is an interesting question that I did see somebody in the audience previously say, but I do want to ask you. You do reference Marxism and leftism a lot, and they can be two somewhat separate ideals at points. Not
no, that's fair. That's fair. I'm considering leftism in its most in the broadest sense. Marxism is a specific manifestation of it. So you can also call into example Jacobinism, Whiggery. You can look at wokeism, DEI, political correctness. There have been many, many manifestations throughout the years. I would say they all broadly fit into the leftist spectrum, if you will. That spectrum of political beliefs. But if we're going to talk about what specifically would make someone Marxist, and that specific misunderstanding you have, and I think it does derive from that belief in the value theory, or the labor theory of value, and the idea that labor intrinsically embodies something with value. So the idea that a pineapple is intrinsically worth something, rather than it's worth being determined by the context by a broader context.
Okay. I think one of the things I did want to ask you is, obviously,
really need a haircut.
I think your hair I listen. I said this. I understand that you wear the bowler hats. In every picture that I've seen you, I saw your hair and I was like, oh, he has a really nice head of hair. You do have a nice head of hair. I hope you show that off more often. Personally speaking, but I do think your hair looks fine right now. But I am curious, about some things that you have said on the internet, and just kind of, if you want to wax poetic on it, and we can kind of have a conversation on it. So in October 22nd of 2023, in a response, you said, femboys actually being oppressed by trans women or vice versa is a very sexy premise for erotica, however. All things in moderation and in their proper place. My question to you is this, because I have seen some people on the internet and other screenshots claim fetishes upon you. I'm very curious how you feel about that conversation in regards to what some things assume about you, specifically within a sexual nature. You obviously do not have to share unless you want to share those things.
Context of that conversation, but yeah, I think it was someone claiming that it didn't exist, and so that was me adding the disclaimer that whether or not it exists, it could be an interesting premise for a story. But then the debate was about how common is this, and you'll get different debates from different people. But I think this gets back into what we were talking about with internet groups that are kind of self-filtering and result in, because of woke Illuminati algorithms, result in people talking to people who already agree with them. You can have extensive discussion from hundreds of people about what they consider to be a common cultural issue, and you'll find out they're talking about a very niche subculture that exists in the internet, or even just a very niche subculture that exists on one site. And that is something you have to be wary of. Is this a broader sociological trend, or is this something that exists in a very narrow context, but is still real within that context? They're not making it up. It's just something that will be an experience for them that won't be an experience for most people.
So I guess
So if I could ask, excuse
sorry.
me,
Sorry,
I didn't want to interrupt you, but if I can ask you something. You speak a lot about how people nowadays are very narrow-minded with their political beliefs and things, and don't really want to intermix with different opinions. And yet you kind of flew off the handle and accused us all leftists and didn't want to discuss it. I said,
But I still
quite
told you, didn't I? I've denounced you all as communists, but I'm still talking to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I
but
just want
did
to
you
be.
make
I just want to be clear about where they stand. I'm not saying we should not discuss with people who disagree with us. I'm just saying we should all be honest about where we stand.
So I think what Dew is trying to say is you have denounced us all as communists, right? And not everybody here is politically leaning left. Some may have more progressive views than others, and that's perfectly fine. But then my follow-up question to you then would be, would that not be the same thing people are doing to you on the internet?
Question: do you think people who don't own land should be allowed to vote?
So
All of you can answer that, please.
so that's I don't really want to answer a question with a question. I would just
I'm not trying to debate you on that
Yeah.
point. I'm just trying to establish what everyone's
yes,
political
people
views
who
are.
don't own land should be able to vote.
Mm-hmm.
Communist. You, the person in red, Uncool Greg. What's your answer to that question?
Yeah, I don't really want to talk to you.
That's fair. That's fair. Greg is just here just to relax. Again, if you're going to continue to, I'm asking you the question personally. You are telling us that we are communists, okay?
And
But
you are then. So yes, I think that's fair, and you are free to disabuse me of this notion.
mhm,
Do any of you hold any right wing beliefs at all?
again,
Like I
Cybersmith.
said, I'm not really interested in politics.
Yeah.
I'll be completely honest with that. Like I
Be-
said, I'm much in the middle. There are things I agree and disagree with,
Mhm.
but I don't know where I would land on the political checkboard.
So again, not to derail, I don't think that you're trying to debate us, but I don't want to miss from the point of the conversation and the question.
It's not so much
the
that I'm trying
question.
to debate you on those points. It's
Mhm.
I think everyone should be honest about where they stand, and I think a lot of people who would describe themselves as being apolitical have just to some extent absorbed the dominant view of the cultural milieus in which they exist. For example, let's say someone existed in ancient Greece, and this person held as a perfectly normal perspective that it was right and proper to sacrifice good meat to the gods while people went hungry. Would you describe that as an apolitical belief?
That's a good question.
What was the question
They
again? I'm
probably
sorry.
wouldn't really
Let's have a
question
look.
it. It would
Mm.
just be a common thing in their society. But I think if
Mhm.
we were to look back on that, if we were to consider context, we would probably say this is a political belief that they did not examine or think of as political. But if you transcribe that person to our society, that would be an immensely political belief.
Ooh,
So I
sorry.
think
Would
the
have
only
more to
real
do with
solution
religion.
is to try to consider your beliefs in context and recognize to what extent they actually are political. And that requires some degree of introspection.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people who consider themselves apolitical have actually just not really examined their beliefs. They have just realized, oh, I've reproduced the beliefs of the society in which I grew up, and I don't consider that to be political. But in many cases, I think those are extremely political opinions. Another common example would be slavery. That same Greek person would probably find the issue of slavery uncontroversial and indeed apolitical. But if we look at other historical contexts, the question of being pro or anti-slavery might be immensely political, and arguably always was political. It's just if you're inside a context that doesn't think of it as a political question, you're likely not to analyze it as one or refer to it as one.
So again,
So I'm not so sure that you are apolitical. I think you've absorbed the Illuminati dogma you grew up with, and you are in fact very left-wing by a broader historical context. You're certainly to the left of most people who have ever existed in all of human history.
well,
You
yes,
just don't
that
see
makes sense. I
yourselves
mean, to be fair,
such.
that would make sense because we did have slavery. That's quite literally a non-argument. Not to be rude, but that's just a fact, though. But
people who considered themselves to have
Okay.
slavery would not have considered that a political argument in ancient Greece.
of course,
So
but we live in
We're not in
the
ancient
year
Greece
in
anymore.
2024. Okay, so this is not disregarding history. This is just explaining that we have learned from history. That's why slavery is illegal now. But that again, that's
But you have to consider that one day people will consider you and your beliefs to be a part of history. Imagine someone looking back from 3024, 1,000 years in the future. how might they consider you and your position in history?
And I'm
this
sure
is
they
why
will.
I believe my perspective is a little more honest. I've tried to consider where my beliefs fit inside a broader framework.
Mhm.
And that's why I don't describe myself as apolitical. I describe myself as a reactionary libertarian
In
monarchist.
1,000
because I
years, we
think
will all
that's a
be
reasonable.
dead, and it won't matter.
This is true.
But we still consider the importance of political decisions and political views of people
Hmm.
who've been dead for 1,000 years. We're still living in the wake of the actions of people like William the Conqueror and their political beliefs.
Right.
So I
But-
don't think it's so easy to say that it doesn't matter what your beliefs are in a historical context. So that's why I do challenge you on this claim that you are apolitical. I think it is more
Okay.
likely you have reproduced the beliefs of the context in which you grew up,
Mhm.
and you have never analyzed them, and you have never really thought about what your belief in those ideas means for you as a person.
But you're
hold
making
up, hold up.
presumptions
Yeah.
to people you don't know.
Yeah, and that's something that we're trying
These are
to.
preconceived notions that you yourself
Mhm.
are
Which
based
I was
on.
very honest. You are free to disabuse me
Right.
of this notion,
Right.
but it is a reasonable conclusion to
But
draw.
what I am
And if
saying
you want to
is,
disabuse me of this notion, please name any right-wing belief that you hold.
so that
And none of you have been able to do so.
so
I am a former veteran, and I believe in owning firearms.
So did Karl Marx. Not
Okay.
impressed.
And so
In-
I can own weapons. I do
Yeah.
own weapons.
Yeah,
That is a right-wing belief.
It's a very right-wing belief here in the U.S.
It's a populist belief, not so much a right-wing one.
So if we're going to argue semantics, let's argue the semantics of what you are doing. What you're stating is the same thing the internet is doing to you, right? We can say that. Now, I can tell you that claiming everybody is a communist who doesn't agree with you or has differing opinions with you is probably not the best thing, and why people view you as a lolcow in certain regards of the internet. Again,
Call everyone who disagrees with me with a communist. I
Well,
call you four specifically communists.
yeah, and we are people that disagree with you, and you have no idea our political beliefs. But that's what I'm trying to get at, Cybersmith. I'm trying to. That's what I want to get at, right?
I actually
It is
have a very good
tribalism.
idea of your political
It
beliefs.
is
Okay.
political
You all believe-
tribalism.
Okay.
All of you believe slavery is wrong. That's an intensely political belief that's been debated hotly,
Mhm.
even in your own countries.
Yeah,
that was debated hotly.
but Greek slavery was also not chattel slavery, though, right?
It was
But it was not.
arguably it was worse. So you couldn't sacrifice your chattel. You couldn't sacrifice chattel slaves to the gods.
So Cybersmith.
Believe me, look at the
Okay.
Greek system of slavery. It was
So
incredibly.
Cybersmith, let me
But
ask
okay.
you a question. Do you believe in slavery?
Do I believe that it existed, or do
No.
I support
No.
it?
Do you support slavery? Yes or no?
Do you support it? Do you agree with it?
Because that is how you're phrasing the question. So it's okay. Hey, listen, no judgment. Do you support slavery?
Not universally, no.
Okay. Can you
but there
expand
go.
on
That's
that?
a
Well, can you expand on
can
that
I
then?
finish my statement as to why I believed I had a good idea of your political views?
No.
So
No,
well,
because unfortunately,
here's the issue.
what I've
You're
noticed.
challenging my belief as being unreasonable, but you're not allowing me to explain how I got to it.
Well, you have said that we are unreasonable multiple times, and
I've said that you are not introspective.
Okay.
You are not really considering the context in which your
That is a
beliefs
presumption.
arose.
that is a presumption. What a
A
lot
presumption you are free to disabuse me
right,
of by
right, and we
at any
and we
time.
all have. It doesn't need to be necessarily a right wing belief, but again, that's what the internet does to you, and what we are trying to get. What I'm trying to get at. I can't speak for my co-hosts, but I will say that what I'm trying to get at for you is why that is important in this conversation, because that is what a lot of people have done towards you. Now, you are espousing some of the beliefs here today and standing by them, like you said that you don't universally agree with slavery. That is a statement. I will say that. But that's kind of why I'm not trying to bring the politics into this discussion, because it does feel like, if I may, it's a little bit of a dog whistle for you to be angry at somebody, right? And it's a little bit of a dog whistle for everybody to be angry at somebody. And
Well,
that's
it's a dog whistle to be angry at someone. A dog whistle is something,
Mm-hmm.
well, in its strictest sense, it is a frequency that only a dog can hear. But in the more general term,
Mm-hmm.
a dog whistle is a signal that only some people will understand.
Mm-hmm.
Who am I dog whistling to when I'm angry
Well,
at you?
you are saying that specifically us disagreeing with you is a way of signaling you specifically that those individuals are leftoids, that we are part of a Marxist regime, right? And honestly speaking, I just wanted to know more about you, less on your opinions on Greece and slavery, because what we were examining was not necessarily your political beliefs per se, but the statements that you've made on the internet and the way that you make the statements currently. I understand, and it is something that I don't want to say sad about, but part of me feels for you. I feel a level of empathy. And you can disavow that empathy. You can say that you don't like it. But I do feel
I have no problem with empathy, but
Yeah.
my argument is empathy is as an action, it is trying to understand others. But there is also, I think, a degree of importance in trying to understand yourself, or at least trying to understand the context in which you have your ideas. And it is very specifically someone who calls themselves apolitical, in my experience, within the current context we exist, is very likely to be someone who is extremely left wing and simply does not realize it. And I've taken slavery as an example. That's a political belief that you don't consider to be political. You, even though it has been at various times an intensely political debate, you oppose slavery to I would consider perhaps an excessive degree. And you asked about condemning slavery universally. One form of slavery I think that might be reasonable to consider is debt slavery or indenturement, because what we have in our society is essentially no way out of debt for people with bad credit ratings. There is no way to restore your credit rating past a certain point. People end up stuck in a trap where they can't undo it. And part of that is if you have no assets, you have no way to pay off your debts. Historically, there was a way to do this in certain societies like Rome, where you could indenture yourself to pay off debts. And this gave people, if they were willing to work hard on, for example, become gladiators, they could work their way out of the debt trap, and eventually they could reach the point of emancipation and fully pay off their debts and re-enter society as free citizens. We don't have that escape route now, and now a lot of people end up trapped in debts they can't escape because we uncritically said all slavery is bad, we completely got rid of it. And people never considered that to be a political belief. So the question of reintroducing it never re-entered political discussion. And this is why calling something
Right.
apolitical can be a bit of a thought-terminating cliche, if you see my argument.
Okay. So again, I hear what you're saying. I think that there's a lot of things that the chat has asked, because a lot of, again, like I said before, a lot of us wanted to know more about you as the person. Some people wanted to know. I can even ask. I have it right here. Like things like your hobbies, your show, like TV shows that you like. That's what we're curious about.
Well, actually, I recently watched. It's funny we're talking about ancient Rome a lot. I recently saw Those About to Die. I think it had some flaws. The first episode, I think, was where Roland Emmerich has this problem a lot. There was a lot of telling, not showing.
Yes, he does.
But on the whole, I actually think that was a reasonably good show. I rather did like. I rather like that. It was great to see the Flavian Amphitheatre being flooded and see mock naval combat. That's something that we're also going to see in Ridley Scott's upcoming film, and I think it's so good we actually finally get to see that. Fight in the so Moist Teeth, I'm now looking at your chat. Fight in the arena or be in debt together ain't a good choice. It's a choice a lot of people took. A lot of people did take it, and it's a choice that we have now denied people in our society who get into debt.
Okay.
And that is part of the problem. And we don't even consider this a political issue. And I think this is the issue with people saying, well, I'm not political, because they don't examine the political content of their own views or the political idea, the ideological political context in which those views arose. And that can be a bit of an issue. So, for example, when Dew of the Mountain, you say you're not political. But had you ever considered this issue of the fact that in some societies, slavery was a perfectly valid way for people to solve debt issues? Had you ever thought about that?
Yeah, of course, it's in history, it was a topic, but my question would be like, how would it look nowadays? Because even a person with a full-time job could get heavily into debt, let's say. What would this modern slavery look like? Because you can't put someone as a gladiator back into the arena.
Well, let's think about all the things that are now extremely difficult to do that used to be historically quite easy. One of the things we struggle with is big construction projects. Even though it's very cheap now to buy raw materials, labor is historically expensive. It's one of the reasons we don't have big cathedrals or pyramids anymore. So if a poor person got into debt, what we might do is their debt could be bought off by someone who wanted a large construction project, and they could work off that debt as an indentured servant, building that person a pyramid or a cathedral.
So something curious that somebody had actually asked before, and digressing, but I would like to know. So, like, what are some of the things that you like to read in your personal time? What are the genres that you enjoy? I'm curious.
I actually read a lot of stuff. Well, I don't read a lot. I don't read nearly as much as I would. I'm starting to think I may have attention deficit disorder. I'm going to talk about maybe getting a prescription for that. But I don't have the attention span that I used to. But I've been reading a lot of Star Wars books, or trying to read a lot of Star Wars. I read recently The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, which is in universe written by Beaumont Kin, you know, the guy that Dominic Monaghan plays in The Rise of Skywalker. I think that was a very interesting one. Okay, so I'd now like to answer the question. So, old point 69. What if we just wipe away all debts every 20 years? Okay, so no one is incentivized to lend money if the repayments period is over 20 years. So how does that impact people's ability to get startup capital for a business? How does that impact your ability to get a mortgage? How does that impact your ability to take out student loans? That's going to massively have knock-on effects on the rest of society. So you would have to find new ways of doing those things. And I think there is an argument that our society is too debt-based, that we should look into alternatives for of financial systems, that we shouldn't have this usury-based financial system. But you then need to answer the question, where are people who want to start businesses going to get startup capital from? You have to find a new answer to those questions. You can't just say, well, what if we had debt jubilees, which are what they used to have back in biblical times? Because then you get the question of, okay, now we are not incentivized to give long-term loans. How do we solve the problems that loans currently solve?
Okay. Something that somebody asked in the chat that I did kind of want to highlight for a second, because again, have you read Stranger in Strange Lands or any other Henlon?
No, not recently. I think I've read some Robert A. Heinlein stuff a long time ago, but not recently.
Okay.
That would be like, back 10 or more years ago. I think I might have read some of his stuff. I said I don't read as much as I used to. I think my attention span is not as high as it used to.
So,
I do think I might have attention deficit hyperactive disorder.
What helps me with that is audiobooks.
Yeah, I was about to say audiobooks are very useful if you.
I actually find it harder to focus on audio than I do when reading. I've always drifted off with audiobooks, so
Yeah.
That's
I do think I have ADHD.
And are you seeing? Do you have a physician that you're seeing for that, or someone that you're speaking with at least?
Yeah, and I'm going to raise this topic with them next time I meet my doctor. I'm just going to say I do think my attention span is what it is, and even having taken steps to manage things like sleep pattern and such, I do think that I've lost some attention span.
So you mentioned that specifically cooking was one of your hobbies. Is there a particular style of food that you like to cook? Are you experimental in your cooking style? I'm very curious because I know that you did bake as well.
I'm not super experimental. When I find something I like, I'll try it again a few times. But so no, I wouldn't say I'm super experimental. There's variations on recipes I've had in ages that I'm happy to try again. It's getting a bit colder, so I'm probably going to use this. it's very hot now. It's going to get colder over the coming months. So when it gets cold, I'm probably going to use the slow cooker again more, and I may try some variations on stews then. There's nothing I'm keen to get super experimental with anytime soon in cooking. Baking, maybe I'll try some slightly newer things.
So let's
I saw one of your, excuse me.
go for it, Dan.
I saw one of your controversial takes was, for example, a good piece of steak shouldn't be spiced too much. I saw that was a discussion.
And absolutely. So that's absolutely a fair point. I think spices are great when you get cuts of meat that aren't very good. I buy cheap cuts of meat all the time. I'll look for yellow labeled diced chicken. Yeah, that doesn't taste very nice. So, absolutely use spices on that. But I think there's an instinct to put spices on everything when it's not needed. If you're for example, I made and this is also true of baking. I made some rolls recently. And I used just cheap plain flour, not bread flour for those. So to give those a bit more flavor, I used some spices. For the sweet ones, I used cinnamon and vanilla. And for the savory ones, I used some mixed herbs, and sometimes I use garlic granules as well. Now that's a really, really cheap flour. That's just plain flour. You can get a 1.5 kilo bag of that for as little as £1 at Morrison's. That's really cheap. Doesn't have a lot of flavor though. It's not going to create the nicest quality of bread. So absolutely, you may want to suppose that. But if I'm making something with nice, high quality, strong bread flour, you're not necessarily going to want to put a bunch of things in that, because you want to enjoy the flavor of the base substrate, and adding a bunch of stuff on top of it isn't necessarily a good idea.
Yeah, I agree. I just saw that there was a discussion around that take, so that stuck in my mind.
So if, let's just say, I come to your home, for instance, and we're having a meal, what is something that you prepare that you feel most comfortable with?
Well, I would check with you in advance. Are you a vegetarian? Do you have any allergies?
No allergies. I eat everything.
Okay. What kind of season is this? Is this a hot time of year, a cold time of year?
How about a cold time of year?
Okay. In that case, I might prepare some pie. I might make a nice beef pie. I'd wait to find some beef that's reduced and freeze it. I've got some in my freezer actually, so I'd maybe take that out. I'd do a nice pie. I'll get the pre-made pastry blocks, and so you can freeze those and defrost them, so they're great for making pastry dish. But having the slow cooker, I'd have add the nice cheap beef. I'd add a bunch of herbs, mixed herbs, garlic, chopped onions to that. Stew that in the slow cooker for hours with some carrots, some nice vegetable stock, a bouillon stock with the beef. Makes a very, very inexpensive meal. Maybe thicken it a bit with some flour if that's looking to get too runny, and then pour some of that into a nice pie filling, and then bake that for about 40 minutes. And maybe I would have that with some, maybe if I'm in a hurry, just some chopped carrots. But if I've got time to prepare it, I'd maybe have that with some potato wedges or some chips. And I can use the air fryer for those. So that might be what we'd have. And of course, have some lettuce for some greens. Or if you're not a fan of lettuce, I'd add some peas in when I'm making. Maybe take out the carrots and add in some peas when I'm making the beef stew, and that'll add some greens to it. And that so you'll have beef and pea pie.
And if there's one thing I'm curious about. I think it's we've been on call for a bit of time, and I did want to, I think we will have to wrap it up soon. Usually our streams
that's fair. It's almost 10 p.m. for me, so yes.
Oh yes.
Oh
so
yes.
I guess one of the things I would be very curious about, it was a discussion that was previous that we kind of glossed over a little bit, because a lot of people have assumed specific things about you, specific kinks. I've seen individuals claim if you're sexual for specific things, and I can't pull up your Twitter on my
thing from Master Mouse, or slurry to avoid lumps. If you dust the flour over it, dust it, stir, dust the flour in, stir, you can avoid clumping up that way. Another solution is to use corn flour and mix that with water. Bit more expensive though. So yes, your question. Sorry.
Yeah. So I guess my question to you, I can't pull up your Twitter, obviously, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I can give you the link if you like.
Oh no. From what I can tell, your Twitter has very many NSFW things that I cannot pull up on YouTube for obvious reasons. So I guess my question to you is this: a lot of people have assumed a lot of things about you when it comes to even, let's just say, sexual identity and things of that nature. From what I've seen from other different posts of people attempting to argue with you for certain things, what would you want the general public to know at large?
Lunar Moon Tea. If you check my my YouTube channel, there's actually a video of me making a lamb pie there. That recipe should work for you. You can substitute in beef and just instead of mint powder, put in parsley. So yeah, that's the answer to Lunar Moon Tea. Sexually, I think we label sexuality way more than historical societies do, and I think possibly more than is healthy. I'd say I'm pretty happy with the label of heterosexual personally.
So I guess specifically what I would ask is that, perusing your Twitter, for instance, there are retweets of diaper specific related content, and I do see that there is some trans related content, which that's more power to you. I think that's great, and I'm just curious. I'm just curious how you view that and what you would want the general audience of the internet to know about some of those things, because obviously, people have thoughts, and even people on the right, specifically, if we're looking at the right, would have specific thoughts on transgenderism and things like that, and having some kind of fascination and attraction to that. I'm very curious how you view yourself and how you would want the audience at large to view you.
Well, I think I don't think it's healthy to be too obsessed with how other people view you. I think people like what they like,
And even if
we can
on
spend the rest of time interrogating where our various tastes come from, but there's documentaries about ABDL and such if you want to get more context about it. The time we have couldn't really get that into it.
Well, I guess my question
from what I know, it's most about the nurturing.
Yes, that kind of nurturing thing
side of it.
Yeah,
that's definitely a factor. Yes.
Yeah. But I guess my question to you is and not a question, but just an expand upon that. There would be people of, let's say, similar political leanings to yourself, if we're going to come back to that now, that would potentially disapprove of those kinds of outward attractions. And I'm not harping on it in regards to the fact that you
would they be similar political leanings to myself, or are they just broadly on the right?
Well, that's what I mean.
Because you've asked me to acknowledge nuance in saying that although you would all say you are broadly on the left, none of you would particularly say that you are specifically communists or specifically Marxists. I'd say the right is also a fairly broad spectrum.
Okay. Well, again, that's kind of that's why I'm speaking very broadly for a second, just because there are those of similar political leanings to yourself who would maybe disapprove or disavow those types of things, or view those things to be disgusting, and specifically with trans individuals, do not believe that they have a place in society. And I'm very curious how you feel about that. I think
a lot of trans people are as they are because we've actually made that the only place for them in society. And I think that is kind of a problem with how we view social roles. And I think if you look at a lot of issues like homelessness, for example, but even something like, say, incels. Why do we have an incel culture? Well, because for a long time we kind of viewed the only things that it was socially acceptable to be once you were an adult was you had to be a married adult person who, there was almost no social respect for people who weren't sexually active. But if you look at history, a lot of these people might have become monks, or they might have joined militant religious orders. And there were very many situations where it was socially acceptable and even commendable to do that. But now we've actually made, in many ways, society very narrow in terms of what it's acceptable to be. So and I think the same thing is true of transgenderism. we've now said that the only socially acceptable things to be past a certain age are adult man and adult woman. We no longer have eunuchs. We no longer have badals. We no longer have these social roles that those people might in previous times have filled. And we have narrowed society so much that anyone caught outside of the narrow roles that we used to have are now either contorting themselves to fit into what they consider to be the closest role to what they can do, or they're just being left out of society altogether. So you look at the modern homelessness crisis. Why do we have a homelessness crisis? Well, I think if we looked at history, a lot of adults were not expected to manage a household. People would live in extended family groups of 3 or 4 families. So consider there really only needs to be one person in that family group who can handle the household expenses, who can handle paying rent and paying taxes, things like that. So you could have perfectly productive adults who had no way of managing a budget sheet. They had no way of managing their own financial affairs. They couldn't maintain a household, but they were still respected members of society. They didn't become homeless. And you also had people who were members of religious orders, and there would maybe be only one person in the entire abbey or the entire monastery or the entire convent who would manage things like paying for repairs, paying rent, paying taxes. So you had huge numbers of adults who weren't expected to manage their own household. You had people who were provided accommodation by their employer. If you were an artist in medieval times, your room and board was part of your payment. If you were hired by a lord to paint a fresco on his wall or make a mosaic, that could very well take you years, even decades, and during that entire time your room and board and food would be paid for and managed by your employer. You weren't expected to handle that yourself. I think a large part of why we have so many homeless people now, why we have incels, why we have transgender people, is we have narrowed the number of acceptable social roles to be independent adult man, independent adult woman. Everyone has to be a citizen. Everyone has to be a taxpayer. Everyone has to personally manage all of these things. And you can, to some extent, split the burden of managing those things with a spouse if you have a spouse. But if you don't have a spouse, and even if you've got no interest in having a spouse, then you are expected to fully manage the household affairs on your own. And I think that is just more of a mental strain that a lot of people are really up to. And those people now become homeless.
So something I would ask, and we can, that all of aside. So would you identify yourself as involuntary celibacy, or a part of that movement in some regard? Just as a curious question, because you did talk about it.
No, I wouldn't.
Okay. That was just the question.
I've never really pursued a relationship in that sense.
Is that so? Then
I do think historically a lot of the people who are now considered incels, they aren't pursuing relationships necessarily because they want them. They're pursuing relationships because they believe that is what will make them valued by society.
So
in historical times, those people might have become monks.
Right.
Or they might have become Knights Templar, and that would have been a socially valued thing that they could do, that they were respected for doing and held an honored position in society for doing. And I think we have too badly narrowed what acceptable roles a person in society can have, and people who fall outside of that are just left behind by society.
So something that's really a curious question when we talk about societal norms, and for instance, so you mentioned the lack of place for eunuchs and other things, the historical context for that. Just as some context of background for me, I was an opera singer for a time, so I do know the historical importance of castrati and things like that, and kind of coming back to some of the things that you are saying, and I'm very curious about this, is so when we talk about a narrow-minded view of the world, and you just discussed the narrow-minded view of how people are interacting and how people are perceiving certain concepts, as you are an individual who, it kind of seems to me, is someone who recognizes the importance and potentially, from what I can tell, the beauty of trans individuals. Is that something that you find difficult in certain spaces that you may inhabit, that some people believe you to be a specific type of leaning, some people expect you to be a different type of leaning, but it sounds like you are far more nuanced than that. Is that something that's happened to you?
Yes, I think I am a fairly nuanced person, but put it this way, I've had far more flack in left-wing spaces for being a right-winger than I've ever had in right-wing spaces for jacking off to transgender pornography. That's so that is a fairly consistent.
So you've had less flack. So in right wing circles for things like that, how do you find that you're?
Well, you have to remember that a large part of right wing circles are dominated by those who don't care too much about hurting others' feelings. So people will get flack for all sorts of things in right wing circles, and you kind of just have to roll with the punches there. So you will get criticism for all sorts of things in right-wing circles.
So very curious then, if you're talking about right-wing circles, for instance, did you ever find yourself, let's say, did you find yourself being ostracized in those circles? And how so?
No, I wouldn't say I ever have.
Okay. But you did mention before that you get a little bit more flack for that, for, in your words, to quote you, jacking off the transgendered persons. And so...
Much less than I've gotten for being a right winger at all in left wing spaces.
Oh, okay. So much less. Okay.
So I've had much less criticism in right wing circles for anything than I have for being a right winger in left wing circles. I find left wing circles have been very, very judgmental of me being a right winger.
I see. And again, like I said, this is more of a general interview. It's not necessarily politically motivated in any way, but I was actually genuinely curious because I'm looking at your Twitter. Again, can't pull it up on the stream for those who may be asking. And I do see that there is a variety of things that you post. You've posted transgender porn. You do post individuals in diapers, for instance. How would you view specifically on a topic like that? How would you feel? Or no, that's not what I want to say. How do you feel that you're viewed at large, specifically for some of those sexual interests that you have?
At large, I'm not actually sure how many people know that. A lot of people just know me as the human pet guy.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of comes to the crux of it. It was kind of in the beginning of this interview where you were a little bit heated, and that's okay. We all have heated moments, but I think that that's something that I'm really curious about. Is people know you as the human pet guy, and to end this interview, I'm really curious. What do you want the internet to know about you? When we describe, when they see this post about how you're discussing about the logistics of owning a human as a pet and kind of going into how it would be societally looked upon and things like that, and how to, and almost in a normalized version of society. I'm very curious, what do you want the internet to know, and the differences between that?
I would like the internet to know that I am Cybersmith, and I am a person who will consider things perhaps from an outside the box perspective. Or maybe I'm not so much outside the box as I am just making you realize how small your box really is. And that's an example. I think that's probably the best analogy. A lot of people aren't really apolitical or politically neutral. They just have a very, very narrow idea of what political discussions are, and so they consider themselves to not have very many controversial political beliefs, because their idea of the spectrum of possible political beliefs is extremely narrow.
So it sounds like to me what you're saying essentially is that even though your beliefs can be somewhat controversial, there's more to you as a person. You're a baker, you're a writer. Do you draw? Are you an artist at all in the visual style?
Very occasionally I'll do something like that, sometimes technical drawings for a science fiction concept. I don't have I'm not especially good for it. I think in some sense I don't really have the patience for it. So to a very minor extent, I'd say maybe.
So So from what I can tell, from what I can see, is that it seems like you're a multi-layered gentleman, and that's honestly speaking, I think that's. Well, I don't know if a lot of the internet knows that, and I will say that. Hey, listen, there's things that we don't agree on. That is a broader conversation, and not something that I would debate on my platform. Let's say, but I would say that I do first and foremost appreciate you coming on to this show. We are a small show, but I do appreciate you. Not necessarily. I wouldn't even say it's defending yourself. It's expanding upon yourself, who you are as a person. And I do think that is something that not a lot of people may know about you. The human pet thing and some of your posts have become essentially copy pastas in the broader sense, and a lot of people would view you as a lolcow to a specific degree. And I do think that we all learn something nice about one another. And I do want to kind of leave that off is that well, you and I may have different political views. I have different views on the way we all use our platforms. But at the end of the day, I think that this was, or I hope it was, a positive interaction for you specifically.
Yeah, I think it was. Is there anything, I know that me and Folky.exe have spoken a lot. Is there anything Mr. Albert or Uncool Greg wanted to add for the end?
I think everything.
Nah, I'm good.
I think
I'm
everything
good.
got said. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do any final words, because I know this is this was someone that you've known of for a period of time.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming on and answering all our questions so honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
You're welcome, and hopefully I've led some of your viewers to perhaps be more analytical of their own beliefs and the context in which those beliefs may have arisen.
Mm-hmm. And I believe that it at the very least they are more understanding or more knowledgeable as you as a person. And I want to thank you for your time. I will let you go, and I appreciate you. Everybody in the chat, I want to thank Cybersmith very much for joining us. It is very appreciated that he did so.
I've got 4 minutes more. If you've got any questions in the chat, any final questions?
I have written down a few questions that we had in the beginning.
All right.
Shoot.
I'm just going to use the restroom. I'll be right back.
Because of course there are some questions that come back to the human pet thing. Like, was that ever a fantasy for you? I know it was hypothetical in that situation, but is that really something you would be into?
No comment. Exercise my right to remain.
Okay.
I've discussed that at length elsewhere. I think people will find that if they look up other discussions.
That's completely okay. And some people also ask, how you present yourself on the internet? How much is that a persona? Or are you just yourself? What would you say?
Is the self not a persona? Isn't everything we do to some extent affected? Our accents, our methods of dressing, of speaking, of interacting with other people, the mannerisms we have, our ideas of what constitutes politeness, they are all to some extent affected. We aren't inherently as humans born with those. They aren't instinctual. So yes, it's a persona, and yes, it's really me. Everything we do is to some extent a persona.
Yeah, I think some people just wonder if you know how some kind of internet trolls can be. That's something that it's all just played up and nothing like.
Well, is any aspect of us not played up? Is there? This is my question: is there such a thing as an authentic person, and what would such a person really be? Is there anyone in the world who would stand up to the degree of scrutiny that would reasonably be required to analyze a real person? You'd have to basically Truman show someone.
I think.
Yeah, I think that was pretty much the question. If you were playing here the Truman Show.
Yeah. I think there I'm trying to think. There are some in the chat. If you want to, feel free and answer those via text. That's perfectly fine. I do want to respect the fact that you do have time and you do have to go to bed.
It's just about 10 minutes. So anyway, I've got that game later, and I'm going to have something to eat. So I'm going to head off.
Okay. Well, thank you so
But
much.
have fun.
Have fun.
Thank
Enjoy
you very
it.
much.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.
I do want to thank Cybersmith. Cybersmith, if you view this video, I really want to thank you very much from the bottom of my heart, personally speaking. Again, like I said to him and like I said to everybody in this call, there are things I don't necessarily agree with Cybersmith. I was not going to do it for the debate purposes because I didn't want this to be a debate. I genuinely wanted this to be a discussion of who he was as a person and his personhood on the internet. And I think that the kind of that last question on is it a persona on the internet is something that's very, very interesting.